Human history is presented like a straight line, from simple to complex, from primitive to modern. And that story feels solid until you realize it's based on almost nothing. The truth is, we're reconstructing millions of years of human life from fragments so sparse they'd be laughed out of any other field. And yet we tell ourselves a clean, confident story about who our ancestors were and how our species progressed. But this story is almost certainly wrong, and recent evidence is beginning to show that prehistory was far more complex than we ever imagined. Hi guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Michael. I have a degree in ancient history, and on this channel, we discuss the unexplainable mysteries of our past. Let's get into it. Our assumptions about prehistory shape everything we believe about what's natural for society, what's inevitable, what's possible, what humans are. We're told that we appeared some 300,000 years ago, starting as simple hunter-gatherers, living that way for the vast majority of our history, before eventually, right at the end, discovering agriculture and developing civilization. It's presented as one clean linear line, from primitive to complex, but when we track the evidence, we find some serious contradictions. So what happens when the history we've built our collective worldview on is based on misleading, barely existent data? What happens if our origin story turns out to be more myth than fact? Let's start with the most basic question. How much of human history do we actually have evidence for? Anatomically modern humans have been around for at least 300,000 years. Recorded history, however, only began about 6,000 years ago, when writing was supposedly invented. That means we only have a record for less than 2% of modern human existence, which makes the other 98% prehistory. And when I say we have almost nothing from that time, I mean it. It's true that archaeologists have found a number of important artifacts all over the world, but these are just a handful of objects. Sometimes entire spans of tens of thousands of years may be represented by a single tooth or a handful of shaped flints. Although modern techniques have dramatically improved our ability to study such deep time, there are hard limits to what can be inferred from so little material. This makes it tempting to fill in the gaps, to claim more certainty than the evidence allows. However, when scientists do this, the resulting narratives can begin to resemble the very biblical-style origin stories that modern science set out to replace. Now, I've partnered with MyHeritage for this video, and right now you can get a full DNA kit for just $29. Yes, $29. That is significantly cheaper than any other DNA company. Taking the test is simple. Watch me do it here. They send you the kit, you swab your cheek, send it back, and that's it. You get a detailed ethnicity estimate, DNA matches where I've just discovered many new family members who I can start communicating with using the MyHeritage internal messaging system. What I was most curious about was whether my results would match what my family believed, that I'm fully white British, and honestly, I was surprised to be 10% Dutch. You can even trace your ancestry back thousands of years with their ancient origins feature. And if privacy matters to you, MyHeritage has committed in their privacy policy to never sell or license your genetic data. Use my tracking link below, use the code BUTTON, or just scan the QR code on screen. Again, full DNA kit for just $29. That's kind of insane. But here's the key thing, this isn't just the kit. With my code BUTTON, you're getting the DNA kit for $29 plus a 30-day free trial, free shipping, and access to their best subscription features for the same price. Thanks to MyHeritage for sponsoring, now let's get back to the video. And in case you're thinking our record can't be that incomplete, well, here's something that gives you a bit more perspective. Something geologists call the Great Unconformity. Basically, unconformities are Earth's way of telling us that a chapter is missing from its history. Now, because rocks pile up in layers, geologists can usually tell which rocks are older or younger based on their position. But since the 18th century, geologists have found many massive gaps in this record, where radically different rock layers sit directly on top of each other with huge chunks of time missing in between. The Great Unconformity is the most extreme case we know, spanning continents and wiping out a staggering 1.2 billion years of history. That's over a quarter of Earth's entire history erased by erosion. Now obviously this occurred long before humans emerged, but the point is, if Earth's geological record literally has billion-year gaps. Why would human history be anywhere near complete? This isn't just a blurry picture, it's a nearly empty canvas. But here's what makes it worse. Even what is left on the canvas is still deeply misleading. Look at stone tools, for instance. They fill museum cases, creating the illusion that stone was central to ancient life. We literally still call it the Stone Age. But stop and think about it, and you realize that the only reason stone survived is that it doesn't rot. How about the other stuff that can't fossilize by nature? Wood, plant fibers, animal hide. All these things decompose and disappear. Yet these materials may have been far more important to daily survival for prehistoric people than the stone tools we obsess over. As this study reveals, bamboos were abundant, easy to shape as knives, spears, and harpoons. However, bamboos are perishable and have left no archaeological evidence. Which means that if whole cultures relied primarily on wood, fiber, or bamboo, they could exist in a sophisticated way for tens of thousands of years and only leave behind a few small stone scraps. But honestly, what bothers me more is that even these scant material remains still tell us next to nothing about the real things that actually define a society. Questions like, how did our ancestors organize their communities? What were their belief systems? How was knowledge passed from generation to generation? Did they sing songs? How did they raise their children? What did they believe about death, the cosmos, or their place in the world? What were their rituals? What was their language? These questions are all practically unanswerable with the surviving evidence, and yet these are the things that make us truly human. I mean, even basic details like diet and appearance have to be inferred from a handful of fossilized bones, which means we don't even have any definitive way of knowing for sure how prehistoric man even looked. Prehistory spans an extraordinarily long stretch of time, during which all we know is that our ancestors sometimes used stone tools, and that's about it. This is where something called Hawke's ladder of inference becomes important, because it shows how quickly we move from the realm of solid evidence into speculation. The ladder describes how we start with raw observations, then selectively interpret them, add meaning, make assumptions, and eventually arrive at firm conclusions that feel factual, but aren't. In prehistory, this climb happens especially fast because the evidentiary base is so thin. Generally speaking, when you hold an artifact in your hand, you can reasonably reconstruct how that object was made, maybe even how it was used, but anything beyond that, and you've left the world of evidence to the world of speculation. And this becomes more unsettling when you realize that even what endures still misleads us. Floods, erosion, and shifting sediments mix artifacts from different eras together, creating what archaeologists call a false impression of contemporaneity. Objects that never coexisted could end up lying side by side, when in reality there might be probably tens or hundreds of thousands of years separating both objects. Our certainty tends to rise precisely where the evidence is thinnest. Unfortunately, when we do that, we're no longer describing the past, we're now filling the silence with assumptions. And in prehistory, it's almost all silence. So we've established that the record we have is extremely thin, fragmentary, and biased, and that history tends to favor matter, not meaning. But even if ancient people had left behind durable artifacts that we could interpret, there's an even bigger problem, and that is the landscapes on which they lived. Not all environments preserve evidence equally. Dry caves, deserts, and frozen regions, great for artifacts. But forests, tropical regions, and wetlands, these areas destroy remains. And the challenge, therefore, is quite obvious. The places that are naturally designed to support long-lasting populations and civilizations are often the very same places most equipped to destroy the evidence of such populations. This creates a massive bias in what we see thousands of years later. On top of this is the issue of sea level. During the last ice age, global sea levels were about 120 meters lower than today, which means that vast coastal plains where we'd expect people to settle are now completely underwater. We see this in Sahul, for example. Sahul used to be this massive landmass that connected Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania, but eventually it was split by rising seas, which led to the submerging of an entire subcontinent that was previously perfect for human life. life. Deep time acts as a shredder. Floods erase sites, erosion destroys remains, the earth recycles the past. And so what ultimately happens is that history goes missing, not merely by accident, but by default. Now, vanishing landscapes are an obvious problem with our record, but there's one more way in which evidence got lost during the course of our history, which is that the people themselves disappeared. And I'm not merely talking about people dying, I'm talking about population crashes. According to some researchers, around 900,000 years ago, our ancestors almost went extinct when their population suddenly dropped drastically by 98% to just about 1,280 breeding individuals, and the population remained this small for over 100,000 years. By the way, there's a 50% chance that you carry the genetic signature for this bottleneck in your DNA. Scientists still debate what exactly caused these population crashes, and while we don't know that for certain, what we do know are the impacts of those bottlenecks. Because when populations shrink that severely, it's reasonable to expect that at least some knowledge vanishes, some technologies get forgotten, some languages die out. And if that happens, then what ends up surviving may not reflect the most advanced cultures or the best ideas. Rather, it might just reflect the luckiest ones. But population bottlenecks do something else as well. They delete entire branches of the human story. The genetic record we study today doesn't reflect how many people once lived, only how many happened to survive, which means modern estimates of prehistoric population size are based not on everyone who ever lived, but only on a tiny fraction whose genetic data made it through. But on top of all this, there's another issue. Say we're looking for a civilization in the deep past. Well, it's worth questioning whether we're even searching for the right thing at all. You know, we tend to assume civilization requires stone cities, temples, pyramids, stuff that leaves dramatic ruins. But the truth is, some of the most sophisticated evidence of long-term social organization often looks nothing like that. In the Amazon rainforest, for example, archaeologists have identified something called terra preta. It's human-engineered dark earths created by a pre-Columbian indigenous people. From the analysis, these soils, which cover thousands of square kilometers, appear to have been deliberately enriched, revealing centuries of sustained ecological engineering. This is civilization without agriculture. We also see a similar pattern in the earthworks of Bolivia: raised fields, canals, and habitation mounds that enabled cultivation even in flood season. Very likely, these systems required coordinated planning across generations, so the absence of pyramids and other monumental architecture cannot be the definitive proof of primitiveness. Long-term planning and ecological knowledge don't leave ruins. Civilizations don't necessarily require megaliths. They require continuity in the form of sustained planning, collective knowledge, and social order. Unfortunately, these are exactly the kind of things that are very hard to find in our records. But as I mentioned before, the problem isn't just that we have a nearly blank canvas. It's that the little evidence we actually do have completely contradicts the simple story we've told ourselves. We often talk about hunter-gatherers like the term describes one thing, one original human lifestyle, like a default setting that all societies must pass through to get to agriculture and then civilization. But you're probably no longer surprised to find that the story is a lot more complex than that. Recent research shows that early human societies were extraordinarily diverse. Some groups were highly mobile, others were semi-sedentary, seasonally returning to the same locations. Some relied on hunting large game, while others focused almost entirely on fishing or intensive plant management without orthodox agriculture. And this is what we know from the tiny amount of evidence we do have. Imagine what else existed that we have lost. So there was clearly not one path to civilization. There was not one universal human blueprint. The hunter-gatherer label is a grossly misleading category that tries to shoehorn hundreds of thousands of years of history into one easy-to-digest label. Everyone was a hunter-gatherer until agriculture emerged, right? But no, this is just a product of our modern ignorance. The cold reality that we just don't know how humans lived in prehistory is almost too difficult for us to comprehend. But there's more. It's common knowledge that we weren't always the only humans around. We had the Neanderthals in Europe and Asia, the Denisovans in Siberia and Southeast Asia, Homo floresiensis in the Indonesian islands, Homo naledi in southern Africa, and many others. Like us sapiens, each of these groups had its distinct physical traits, brain structures, behaviors, and cognitive capabilities. And for a long time, the different human species coexisted and even interbred until, one by one, the others disappeared, leaving us as the only surviving species. Why us? Well, we may never know, but perhaps this explains why we've instinctively curated a tidy story of linear progression for ourselves. We know we have a real history, but there are also so many gaps in it that it makes it incredibly fragile. So we invent continuity to give our history solidity, because who are we if we have no story? The problem is, however, that the stories we make up often go far beyond what the evidence supports. Anthropologist Daniel Lord Smale perfectly captures this problem when he says, and I'm paraphrasing, "The discipline of history is haunted by its own imaginative reconstructions." Now, don't get it twisted. The big problem here isn't really that we're missing all these answers about deep human history. Yes, that's troubling, but the actual problem is that we've placed too much confidence in the fragmented version that we have. Stage-based history assumes humans pass through neat phases, from hunter-gatherers to city builders. But what if what we're seeing is merely preservation rather than progression? When you think about it, human history couldn't possibly have been a single line, from simple to complex. That's far too reductionist. So why do we tend to picture prehistoric people as primitive, overly simplistic nomads, when the evidence suggests something far more compelling? Could it be that what's actually primitive is how we define prehistory, intelligence, and civilization? Could it be that we have been the real primitives all along? Thanks so much for watching, guys. Use my tracking link below, use the code BUTTON, or just scan the QR code on screen. Again, full DNA kit for just $29, that's kind of insane, plus a 30-day free trial, free shipping, and access to their best subscription features for the same price. Thanks so much everyone, subscribe, like, comment, all of that down below. I'll see you next time.